Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. This is Tim Harris, and this is the world's greatest agent interview series. And today I have somebody who I've been really looking forward to interviewing, someone Julie and I have been a big fan of for a long time, and someone who's also part of our eXp Realty family, Miss Keri Shull. So Keri, without any further delay, welcome and let them know about you and your wonderful family. And I'll brag about all of your success if you don't want to do it for you.
Well, I'm happy to share. Thank you for having me, Tim. Okay, so I have 4 children that are 8 and under. I'll start there just to frame what my life looks like in the morning. 3, 5, 6, and 8. I have 79 agents on my team, which is located in the DMV. I have a coaching company that specializes in helping team leaders scale their organizations, and I'm a developer.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, were one of the most successful real estate, independent brokerages on planet Earth. And now you're with eXp Realty. So let's just start out there. So why did you decide to move over to eXp? And then let's get into whatever you want to talk about. You know what agents always want to talk about. You do tons of live events with your coaching organization. But for you, Carrie, you sold, this is the part where I brag about you. You guys closed 732 million in 2021. What, 12 or 1,300 transactions, something like that. So success and Keri Shull are kind of synonymous, and you moved over to eXp. Can you explain why?
Yeah. So first I'll say, I was an eXp hater. So I had zero intention of ever joining eXp. And we can talk about all the reasons that I had that mindset. But in 2022, I had a very traumatic year. And so I went from having 76 agents to 29 agents, 27 actually. And the reason that I believe that happened is I was my own little island, right? And I didn't have the right structure to be able to elevate my agents beyond me. I had a lot of agents that had been with me for 8 to 10 years. And I was really distracted because I just had my 4th baby and I wasn't giving them the love and attention that they have come to expect from me. And Compass came around with huge checks. So somewhere between $2.5 and $3 million of checks. They were feeling neglected and wanting something different. And had I been clued in as a leader and focused on creating and elevating them faster, I believe they'd all be with me today. But when I was kind of at the point where I was trying to decide what to do, my husband met with Tim actually on this podcast. No, it was on our podcast, right?
On your podcast, yeah.
So Dan interviewed Tim. And afterwards, Tim said, "Hey, why are you not at eXp?" And I think Dan probably, said my wife would never think about that. And that didn't stop Tim at all. So they had a conversation. And for me, people had talked about the rev share and the financial opportunities, and I'm impact driven. And so until someone talked to me about the ability to elevate others and stay in financial alignment with my partners and actually have me be in partnership with the brokerage, because all of the agents at eXp are owners in the brokerage, especially those that are selling a lot of homes and that are really successful and productive. It would have never occurred to me. Then all of a sudden I linked how my long-term vision and my desire to scale beyond the DMV and my desire to scale people beyond my own team all kind of came together at eXp. So that's how it happened. And I was shocked.
So the last part is the reason that was a big driver for Julie and I as well, because it did feel like, and what you're expressing, and I wrote a few questions down, is eXp was the next natural step in your career as an entrepreneur, as a real estate broker. It wasn't like a sidestep. It was the next step up, because you could offer, like, you're right now able to your agents can have a career path that goes beyond just your real estate team or your real estate brokerage through EXP. That means you can attract more agents to you. Your words, sorry.
No, you're exactly right. And like in this moment, I'm sitting this morning having a conversation with somebody who successfully scaled car dealerships in our area in the DMV that wants to get into real estate. And he came to me because of my reputation in the industry. But he has a lot of people that are heavily recruiting him in the area. I talked about his relationships in Turkey. And because he wants to build a business in Turkey in the long term, and that's his vision, and EXP will go into Turkey, I have an unfair advantage in recruiting an extremely talented entrepreneur. So the natural step up is to be able to scale and go where opportunity flows. And when you're an independent broker, you're alone, and you would have to hire a broker there, and think about what you would need to pay a broker. And then how would that scalability work? And do you have the right technology? EXP spends millions of dollars on technology. Do you really think you have the right technology to have a cloud-based environment? If you're really honest with yourself, the answer is likely no, right? So I absolutely, once I understood all of the opportunities and the ability to get relocation accounts, foreclosure accounts, all of these extra leads through the affiliation with EXP, every brokerage I've ever been at, they've never provided the opportunity to gain leads from joining a group. It's crazy. And then Zenlist. So Zenlist is one of my favorite things to talk about right now. You want me to share a little bit about why that's so meaningful to me?
Well, yes, but you just said something that's so important. It just goes to the fact that you're such a big thinker. So a normal agent's going to think in terms of basically how to make their team larger, maybe their brokerage larger. And that usually for most people, brokers and teams, that's the big opportunity at EXP, because they can figure out multiple revenue streams, better environment for them and their agents. But you were thinking even a level beyond that. You're thinking about, how can I actually partner with the guy who wants to start EXP in Turkey? And I know those conversations are going on right now. So that's really fascinating. I hope listeners, you're listening to the way she's thinking, because that's what EXP offers. That's so above and beyond what you're going to experience as certainly an independent agent, let alone a team or a broker. It gives you an opportunity to think globally, and your network can be literally all over planet Earth. So yes, let's talk about what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So then if you think about locally, how do we dominate? One of the key differentiators, I've been known in my market for being the person who sources off markets. I started my career sourcing off markets for builders. That's how I grew, right? And EXP is different than a Keller Williams, or different than a Remax, or different than all these other brokerages, because it's not franchises. When it's a franchise, you can't share coming soon properties in the same way. But because we're all one organization and we're huge, we all share. So we get access to properties. So this is a recent story. This just happened. One of my agents sourced an opportunity for a flipper. Flipper says to her, "You brought me the opportunity. I'm going to let you sell it. But I just want to set the expectation. My very good friend is an agent. And so it's not my intention to list any of my other properties with you, only this one, because you brought it for me. He lists everything else." She's like, "Okay, got it." She puts property in Zenlist. While they're flipping it, an EXP agent comes along, sells it at the price that was his high five number. And he's like, "Wow, that was insane." She's like, "Yeah, we have this incredible network." He goes, "Listen, I feel a little disloyal to my friend, but I'm going to give you all my future listings." I think we've sold 6 since that happened, and that was only a few weeks ago.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, that just goes back to the fact that it is really, you mentioned REO, you mentioned Relo, there's the luxury division at EXP. There's the ability to, without barriers, because it's online, communicate with EXP agents, in 24 different countries. It's really cool. But unless you want to stay on EXP, let's pivot and talk about stuff that's going to be probably, maybe lead generation or things like that. Because you and I had a conversation, it was a while ago, and you were explaining a lot to me about something I found very fascinating. It's essentially bought buyer leads. You were one of the only, I don't know, Keri, if there's anybody else in the country that sold as many houses as you, that is not essentially affiliated as a Zillow Flex agent. Because a lot of these big teams, and that's at all brokerages, Julie and I see them in our coaching business, as do you, they have this relationship with Zillow where they're getting, you know, leads, and there's 40% referral fees, and they have all these buyer agents, and, you know, they're not really making any profit off those buyer sides, depending on what the price point is. But you decided to say no to that. And can you kind of explain to people how you did that as a business person? Because Keri, that had to be a super hard no, because you knew what you were walking away from. You decided to not have all the big numbers to, you know, brag about, the headline numbers. You actually wanted to have the profit. And I'm teeing you up here to give these guys a, you know, MBA conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I go back to when I was in that place, you know, we're selling a lot of properties, we're successful. I tracked exactly my cost per lead, right? My cost per Zillow lead at the time was $119. And they said, hey, we want to interview you for this amazing opportunity, blah, blah, blah. So I get on, and it's like, here's what we're going to offer you. You know, we're going to charge you a referral so you don't have to pay for your leads up front. And this is the interview. And I'm like, can you help me with something? I did the math. It was like $4,000 per closing I was going to pay. And our conversion was great, right? So when I did the actual math, like cost per closing, I'd be giving up thousands of dollars. So I was like, how many people are you interviewing that are saying yes to this? And they were like, well, everybody's saying yes. I said, well, I'm not interested. They were like, why? I said, that doesn't make financial sense. Like, and part of that for me, I think having the confidence to say, I'm not interested, was because I had confidence that I would be able to figure out how to generate leads. I always had. The first year, I'm aging myself here, Tim. The first year you could advertise on Facebook. I got multiple closings from tweaking and testing and figuring out how to run ads, right? I've always been somebody that figures out how to generate leads. And I think my superpower, which has gotten harder, I will say, has been niche marketing. So I try and focus, instead of focusing on just like blanketing a huge group, like as an example, when I wanted to dominate builders in North Arlington, I focused specifically on the properties where the land value was big and the value of the property was low. And I only sent direct mail to those targets, right? So I just felt like my marketing brain could handle the challenge of using data to my advantage so that I didn't need to give up that kind of money for closing.
And they're all buyer sides too. Because so can you do the math, explain to them on, like, for example, if you had a $10,000 commission come in, right? And can you break it down? We can use, you know, 80-20 split for the, you know, the whole thing. Can you explain to the listeners how little profit, if any, is left for the Keri Shull team leader if they're buying their leads from?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do my best. I might have to lean on you for some math here, Tim. But basically, when you think about it, if the commission that's coming in total for the deal is $10,000 and Zillow's taking 40%, right? And then you're paying a buyer's agent, you're paying for overhead, you're paying for ISAs, you're paying for office space, like all the things. By the time you look at the net income that you're generating on that deal as the team leader, it is my belief that a lot of team leaders are actually negative. So they are in this hamster wheel of personal production where they have to do deals to survive, because personally, they are literally like, I built a team so I could have freedom, right? But then because of the choices they've made, the sources of leads, the overhead, all of these things, they're not profitable and they don't know how to pivot and they feel trapped. So they end up having to sell more and more and more homes to keep the mouse trap moving.
Yeah, and no one tells them that there's another way. And that's the reason that you've been attracting DXP so many teams and brokers, because they're finally, like, Keri, other than Julian and myself and you and Dan, I honestly don't know anyone else in the industry that will ever have a conversation about the fact that most of the bot buyer leads result in negative cash flow for a team or a broker. And it's all, you know this because you're dealing, you and your husband are right now talking with some of the largest brokerages in the country about moving over to DXP, you know, without saying any more than that. And when you get into their math and you look to see where they're not making any money on these buyer side transactions. I mean, listeners, think about what you said. It's a $10,000 GCI. There, on that sale, on that buyer sale, you got 4,000 going to Zillow. You're going to pay the broker something. That buyer agent's going to want a 50-50 split. Then you have fixed costs there to service that actual, the buyer's agents are going to have some kind of, closing coordinators and whatnot. There's virtually no profit left on a buyer side when you're paying 40% for the buyer lead. The math gets a little bit different if your average is going to be, say, $30,000, but for the most part, the average buyer leads resulting in a $10,000 commission based off of roughly $400,000 sale and 2.5%. The math isn't exact, but you guys get the point. So one of the things, and I know Keri does this in her coaching organization too, is when you're doing your profit and loss for your team, you want to run a profit and loss on the buyer side and a profit and loss on the seller side. And 99.9% of the time, what Keri said's exactly what you'll discover. You're actually taking what would be profit from the seller side of the transactions, and you're subsidizing the buyer side of the transactions. You're taking money that should be going in your pocket, team leader, broker, and you're actually essentially paying to have that buyer agent staff there. Keri, why do people do that?
Well, so I think that there's a lot of reasons they do it, but before we move on to that, I think what's more important is how to solve for it, because sometimes you might even recognize as a team leader you're doing it. And I'll say the reason. I think it's because as you start getting bigger and bigger, there's pride in growth, right? And as somebody who took a big step back to take a step forward, that was painful because I felt like, man, I worked for all these years, 8, 10 years, to foster these agents into being highly successful and productive, and therefore my team into selling over 700 million in volume in a year, right? And as I had to replace the top leaders and retrain new people, that was really, really hard. So I recognize I'm not belittling the emotional response to feeling like you are on the hamster wheel and you need to keep producing. I think one very, very important thing to make sound business decisions, Tim talked about a buy side P&L and a listing side P&L. I think that's really wise. I also think that you should have a separate portion of the P&L where you track all of the expenses, and then you track the net income from the agents, and then you track the net income separately from your personal production. And your personal production includes the production that you're doing with a partner. So I'll be happy to talk a little more of that. I just studied my P&Ls all the way back to 2014. And one of the things I discovered is that, and I have another big, big important thing for that P&L. But if you're looking at all of the expenses and your team is not fully paying for itself without you looking at your production and paying somebody to do that production, then you have a serious problem and your expenses are out of hand and you have to decide how to fix it, right? Because if you decided at any point, let's imagine that you had a family emergency and you couldn't sell homes and you had to pay somebody what you would normally pay under your comp model to sell those properties. If the math doesn't work, you're trapped. You don't have a business. You have a job, and you have a scary job because you have all this pressure of providing for everybody else. So
let me clarify what you're saying. She's saying so a lot of team leaders are back in production now on the listing side of the business. And what I hear Keri saying is if your business does not produce a profit with you having maybe hired someone in to go on listing appointments for you, then you don't really have a business. You have basically a nonprofit business, essentially.
Correct. Where you are the producer. So if you just got rid of all the overhead and just became an agent again, it might be less stressful. I don't believe that's the right choice, by the way, at least for me. I think that there's different choices depending on your vision and the kind of scale you want to have as a team leader. But I think having awareness is critical. So here's the other big mistake I hear team leaders around the country making right now. Let's imagine for a moment, we're talking about a different lead source. Like let's take realtor.com. Okay. Or even Zillow, if you're still doing paid Zillow, right? A lot of people that are doing paid Zillow, they say, my lender pays for half of the leads. So when they're running the ROI and the profitability on that source, they're only counting the half that they pay. I think that's a huge mistake because it doesn't actually give you an indication of You could invest that towards client parties. You could partner with your lender to bring your clients together and wine and dine them, and your ROI might be higher. So for people who are making a tiny bit of profit and they're not counting that the lender's contributing, I think you have to run the ROI on that lead source based on the full payment and find out if it's still profitable. And I would assert for most of the people using Zillow out there, it is not.
Yeah, it is not. But we should say this, Keri, that 10 years, well, so when Julie and I were selling real estate, mostly in the 90s and then to very early 2000, that's when the teams really started to take off through Howard Brinton. We don't need to go down, and review all the history of it all. But back then the teams were profitable because you weren't buying leads and buyers agents weren't demanding at least 50% referral fees and the commissions were higher. Those three things. So back then when you were building a team, the buyer agents were going to lead generate. The buyer agents weren't going to be able to, they weren't so much in control as they are now. And like I said, the commissions are higher. So 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the business model that agents to this day are still emulating, it did work and it did produce profit on both sides of the, listing and buyer side as a team leader. Nowadays, it just doesn't work that way. The thing that, and you said this, Keri, and I appreciate that. I honestly feel sorry for all the agents and brokers and team leaders right now. I know you feel this way too, because we've talked about it, who are beginning to doubt themselves because of the fact that their business model isn't working the way it did 10 years ago. And they're thinking the problem is them. They're thinking that they can't change, they can't evolve. They think, whatever, my best days are behind me. You can hear it in their voices, they sound defeated. And the fact is the business model changed. And the fact is, if they were successful in the past, they can be successful in the future. And that's the reason you and Dan are attracting so many of these big teams and brokerages, because, and I wrote this down, Keri, because I think it's really true. What you're authoring essentially is what I'm calling Teams 2.0. It's the new business model for teams. It's the new business model for brokerages that are essentially a hybrid of teams and brokers. It's Teams 2.0. That's the reason that I see so many people joining under you guys at EXP, because you're the one, Keri, who's been there, done that. No one can argue that you're not the, queen of the production. And you're the one that's saying the truth about how the actual net versus gross works. And people are saying, you know what? Maybe it isn't me. Maybe my best days are still ahead of me. That's what I really love about you and Dan, is the fact that you guys are giving those people a safe harbor. You're giving them a place to evolve to. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think what's unique about how we approach tweaking their model, you don't have to throw the whole thing out. You don't have to start over. There are just some tweaks that you can make that have a massive impact on profitability that are not going to break your heart. But if you don't have your eyes wide open to the facts, you really are not able to make the right decisions. That's the tough part. And I talk to team leaders all the time that are like, man, I hired this coach and they told me to throw out my whole team and start over. Then I went to this coach because I wasn't willing to do that. I love these people. We've built this together. Then I went to this coach and they told me, you're going to need to cut all of your marketing. You need to cut everything. And then you're going to lose your team if they do that. So what is the in between? And my personal feeling is that there's ways to take your model and evolve the structure of the personal business that a lot of team leaders are trapped doing to make the profitability on that business incredibly high. So I'll give you an example. When I was in the business, I recognized that I really liked the training aspect. I really liked coaching the top agents. I like to get people to be highly, highly productive. Okay. And so if I was going to be able to do that, I could not be in production myself. But I actually love, this is going to crack you up, Tim. I love working with buyers. Buyers are my jam. Listings, I'm like, buyers like light me up and give me fulfillment. So because I knew that about myself and I'm so impact driven, I knew that I had to have a structure where I got to stay close to that side of the process, but eliminate the time suck. And for a lot of team leaders out there, they're like, if I could have that fulfillment and not have the time obligation, I'd be thrilled, right? So I had a right hand that was my buy side and a left hand that was my list side. And I structured their payment a lot different than other team leaders are. And I was able to get that to over 90% profitability coming back to the team.
Can you walk us through it? Or is that something you'd like to do individually with them when they contact?
I'd be happy to walk through it.
Okay.
So I think that the goal is to figure out, and it's different in everyone's market, right? But in my market, I started out paying a base of 35 to 40,000, depending on the position. And then I had a bonus structure that went with that. But imagine the difference of converting a lead when you're a brand new agent and you're going into an appointment and you need to convert that lead on your own. Imagine how much different their career paths were because they got to sit beside me and watch me do it first. So what I did was basically help them understand the compression of time in their personal growth by being in those roles. Both of those agents ended up being top agents on my team. One nearly did 100 transactions
Hmm.
in a year, right? So they both stayed in those roles over the years and did higher and higher production. It got to a point where I was netting over $1 million on just one of their businesses, right? So if you're a team leader listening to this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, if I could net 400,000 or 500,000 on having one member of my team work my SOI, what would that look like? I can teach you exactly how I did it. There's some mistakes that are very common that I see from team leaders that derail the progress and make them feel like they're a failure. And that doesn't have to be the way that it goes.
All right. So I'm going to ask you about that. So what are the big mistakes you're seeing team leaders make? I'm writing this down.
The biggest is they get a taste of freedom, right? And they're like, good luck. And they're out the door. And then that modeling that the agent who is taking that role wants to see, they're not all the way ready to do it on their own. So I didn't stay going to all the appointments forever, but I definitely did it in a really systemized way. Okay. So we have process for everything. We break down the way that we work with buyers into 3 simple steps. All right. When you go into an appointment with your partner, you don't say like, good news, Tim, today's the day. You're in charge, buddy. And that's how most team leaders do it. And then they're horrified when the conversion rate isn't matching their conversion rate. So for me, I do it in chunks. So the partner's first responsibility on the buy side is the needs analysis. It's pretty hard to mess that up. Okay. So it gets them feeling confident. And if I feel like they're not getting the emotional connection to a need, right? And all team leaders understand this. If you can't, I need a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Okay. Help me understand why you live in a 1-bedroom now. Why is the second bedroom important to you? Well, my mother comes to visit and we have to give up our bed and we end up on the couch. Like, what is it? And what does it solve? Well, actually, it creates incredible tension with my husband and I, and makes us miserable and causes fights. And so it just is all this tension. That is the emotional connection. And if the person that you have in that role doesn't understand how to dig deep enough to get that emotional connection, their conversion will suck. So you're right there behind them, listening for the things that they may need to go deeper on to do it beside them so they recognize how to get to the actual emotional need. Does that make sense?
You're talking about pre-qualifying,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
Well, I call it needs analysis. And I do all of the financial questions in that conversation. So I'm also training them and sometimes like knocking out the fear around the hard conversations with money, because everyone has a wonky relationship. Not everyone. Many people that I work with have a really interesting relationship with money. So I have to train them to have it be very matter of fact and normal to ask about annual income, debt ratios, how much they have in savings, how much they're putting down, because I don't think you can be a professional advisor in this business without understanding someone's financial disposition, right? And their emotional reactions to you talking about money. You think that might be important to close them. I would assert that it definitely will be. So we do that up front in the initial meeting. So I'll have them just do that part at first. And then I'll take over with the buyer presentation and also closing them to sign the agreement. And then something we call the reality check analysis. Once I feel like they've got that and they're getting all the way to the emotional need, I take over that portion and then I pass it to them on the buyer presentation. Once I feel like they have that, I take over the first 2 sections and have them do the reality check, which is absolutely the hardest part, because you're using the MLS and data to drive the client's decisions and to get them very realistic in their expectations, right? But my point for team leaders is a lot of you guys are teaching them in a classroom. You're having them shadow you once or twice, and then you're passing the baton and you're wondering why they're not succeeding. I think that having patience and really helping to have them gain situational awareness and emotional insights from the client is important. And how you follow up from that meeting with your partner is absolutely critical. So a few things I've learned over the years in helping team leaders train the people who are standing in for them. You can't give them all the answers. You have to teach them to think really deeply. So I would always drive with my partner. And when we'd be in the car, I would be asking questions. Hey, what did you notice about the objections that they asked? This. Why did you think I responded that way? What could I have said better? What did I miss from their body language? How would you have approached this objection? Okay, let's role play. If I said this, what would you say, right? So what you're doing is solidifying the learning from each appointment. So it's all the way in here and they can vocalize the solution. So the next time they're in that environment, they nail it. So by the time you're walking away from the appointments and passing it over, they're so confident. They're only bringing you in once in a while, but most team leaders don't have the patience to get there. They walk away too soon.
So you said something at the very start, and it's something that Julie and I talk about a lot too. It's a mistake everyone makes, really. There's a difference between delegation and abdication. It's like when a queen or a king abdicates their throne, they just give up all their authority and, they walk away, which is what you described a lot of team leaders do. So when you're building your team, you're adding staff, you can delegate, that should be a goal, but don't abdicate. So you can delegate, but you're going to have to put levers in place, dashboards in place, whatever you want to call them, so you can monitor that the process is being followed. That's absolutely true. But Keri, this is also fascinating. I'm sure you've discovered this too with coaching agents, is a lot of times agents they will have a very low level understanding of how to say, for example, pre-qualify a seller, let's just say, or talk with a for sale by owner. This is the one I see a lot. You'll see agents who will hire a bunch of, VAs basically to, prospect expireds or do circle prospecting or whatever, but they've never done it at a high level themselves. They've never set appointments. They've never actually done the real work of real estate. And they wonder why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you don't know how to do it. So how are you going to hold somebody accountable to doing it other than just the appointments that they set? If you can't sit there in the car, using Keri's example, or listen to them on the phone and know exactly where they're screwing up or where they're doing really well, how can you ever expect to have a business? I mean, I'm sure you discovered that a lot too.
Yeah. So I'll share with you. I think early on, I had a coach that told me, Keri, the last job that you will have on the team is to be the ISA. That was like acid on my soul. I could barely sit still, like for us to have this conversation, because I like to be running around all the time, right? And so when he told me that, I was like, oh, yuck, I don't want to do that. Now, this individual was a DC, same personality type as Dan. I am a DI, right? So I love the relationship building but I recognized, okay, if I'm going to do this at a high level and I'm going to hire an ISA team, which he told me not to do, by the way, then I have to be absolutely deadly on the phone or I'll never. So I spent a full year. I went to role play script training for a year. And I still can go toe to toe with all of my ISAs and train them on how to handle different objections. And I'm very willing to do that at any point, right? But if I didn't learn that foundation, I wasn't somebody who sat at a desk and made calls for years, but I studied intensely for the first 12 months to make sure foundationally I could always help them, whatever objection would come up, because I intimately understood them.
It's like, if Julie were here, she would you bring up her piano story. She used to play, in orchestras and whatnot. But when she was a little girl, she had a teacher who was a flute teacher who also taught piano. Well, she was really good at teaching flute, not really good at teaching piano. So she taught Julie all these hacks for playing piano. And it wasn't until Julie was in her 20s, mid 30s, that she started taking lessons from a real, Carnegie level piano player, that she had to relearn the whole process. But that's the reason her piano career never really went anywhere, because of the fact that she learned it wrong in the first place. And so this is going back to, actually, Keri, I think this is a really nice loop here, because we were talking before about these agents and these brokerages that are reaching out to you and Dan. And a lot of them are kind of licking their wounds, not knowing what to do. They're sort of lost. They want to continue to be successful. Well, sometimes it's going to take having a hard conversation with Keri Shull to go back in time and for you to do a little confessional as far as what you actually don't truly know how to do, and you're delegating to others, expecting that they'll somehow magically know how to do it at a high level. But I'm going to pivot and talk about something else too, something I know you guys did really well. It was probably about 18 months ago, something like that. It was 18 months ago. You had decided you have a huge CRM. You're doing a really top level job of following up with all, the state of the art CRM. We don't need to say much more than that. But you and Dan decided to start having your agents call the people in the CRM, and then the appointments. Can you talk to them about that? Because that is so important, and agents aren't doing it.
So I think if I'm reflecting on the timeline, it was about 12 months ago. Okay. And I know this because I started like peeking under the hood. We use Follow Up Boss. I think I'm not paid by Follow Up Boss. I think Follow Up Boss is the best CRM that exists for teams. So I will say that. But as I started peeking under the hood, what I saw is, holy Toledo sakes, we have, can you tell I have 4 children? We have 159,000 leads, and there are so many of them that are not getting the attention that I would want them to get, or that I believed they were getting as a team leader, right? And so then I had to question, why are my agents choosing not to call these leads? I know that they want to get more deals done. I believe that they're motivated humans. So where is there a conflict? So I think another mistake team leaders make is they place blame on others before they take ownership for what they need to change. Okay. So instead of going back to my team meeting, I was at a real estate conference when I made this commitment to myself that I was going to create this culture, right? I could have come back, and on Monday, I could have stood in front of my team and said, okay, guys, we're going to start making calls. And it would have failed miserably, right? Because there were some core things that were not in support of that consistent behavior. Okay. So the first thing is very simple. It's super tactical. And for some people listening to this, it may sound silly, but when I looked under the hood, it was the number one thing that was creating confusion inside of my CRM. Okay. So I had agents that were not using the app within Follow Up Boss. So the reason that was so deadly to the culture of calling is that if Tim and I were both agents on my team, and on a Monday morning, we were like highly motivated and we sat down to call, and Tim was being naughty and he was calling on his cell phone and I was calling within FUB, we were calling on top of each other. So the second lead that I sat down to call tells me to F off. Tim called me 5 minutes ago. Why are you calling me? And then I think, oh, yuck, I didn't like the way that felt. And I head down the street to Starbucks and I run into a friend, and next thing you know, my prospecting time is over and I go about my day. Okay. So I had to make a decision to protect the culture of calling, that if it didn't happen in FUB, it didn't happen. And I had to start taking leads away that weren't being followed up with in FUB. So another mistake, if you make a change and you say, this is the day that I'm making the change, and you just start ripping leads away the next day, your top people will likely leave, right? So you have to enroll them, which takes consistent follow-up, and it's harder. But in my opinion, it pays off more in the long run. So as an example, I personally audited who was using FUB and who wasn't. And then I'd pick up the phone. Hey, Kim, I saw that your client, I'm so glad that I looked into this, because I was getting ready to move your client, Bobby, to Tim. And then I was horrified because I saw it does look like he's looking at properties every day, but gosh, I don't see when you called him in there. Oh no, I talked to Bobby. Oh, but you didn't call from FUB? Oh shoot, I didn't call from FUB. No, thank God I called you. Hey, do me a favor. Just make sure, do you have the app on the first page of your phone? Here's how you do it, right? So then they know, oh gosh, she's looking, right? And the other thing, this is tactical. It's like basic, but I'm just going to walk you through it. If you're a team leader that's like, I can't get them to do it. Well, a lot of times they don't understand the tech. So try and put yourself in their shoes. I am tech challenged. So it's really easy for me to put myself in the shoes of an agent. So when we did this change, we downloaded FUB as a team. We had them log in, like here it is. We had them switch the bubble to being in the same place on the first page. And then we had them update a contact record in their phone, because what's the number one objection you're going to get? Well, but my clients don't know my FUB phone number, so I can't text them from that number. This is super easy. It's a reason to follow up with your client and makes you look more professional. So we updated the contact record. They have their office number. They have their mobile number. They text the updated record to their client and they say, hey, I just got an office number. I want to make sure you have both my numbers. So whichever phone I text you from, you'll have it that it's me. Make sure you have a beautiful gleaming photo. Make sure it says Realtor, a space, Keri Shull Team, because some of these people that you met with 6 months ago that haven't found a house, they don't remember your name anymore. Even if you're following up with them, you're not getting them live. So we actually sold a bunch of homes just by having everybody text their client their contact card and say they got an office number. And then it completely eliminated the objection of, yes, but they don't have my number, so I can't use it, right? So once we cleaned all that up, our smart list started, miraculously, our smart list started working. And so that was the main issue we were having with getting people to make calls. In the last 6 months, we've went from, okay, we're consistently getting 50 appointments from our buyer agents. Now we're crossing that 100 appointment threshold pretty consistently, 100, 105. So if you're a team leader watching this and you really want to have a shift, you really want your agents calling, take a look under the hood, take personal responsibility and figure out, what do I need to fix to make this effective? One other thing, we accidentally had, a lot of times if you use FUB, you have something called view all ponds. We had our recruiting pond of agents in the ponds. So they were making calls and people would be like, I'm a real estate agent. Why are you calling me? Right? So when I was listening, I was asking lots of questions like, tell me what frustrates you and make calls. That's the way to start as a team leader. Like, what's going wrong? I know I have faith in you, Tim. I know that if this was something that you could do, you would do it because you're motivated to make money, right? Yes. Okay. So tell me, what are all the things that go wrong when you try and make calls? And then you as the team leader fix those things and say, good news, Tim. I did it. I fixed these things. So now you can make money. And Tim's like, oh shit, now I got to make calls because I said I would. Right? So that's what happened. And it's worked out beautifully.
I'm smiling because I remember when we were in Orlando and your little son, your youngest son, no, your second youngest son, Caddy, Silencio, por favor. Your son threw something over the ledge and he started to cry, and you went over there to him and you know he was in trouble, and you said you had the same tone in your voice that you have when you're talking to your agents, you know, when you were just doing that little role play. I was just remembering when we were in Orlando and you were saying, I'm sorry that you threw that over and you're so upset and you didn't follow the instructions. I'm sorry that you're in trouble and you have to have a timeout, and you were making it so his behavior was, you know, it was artful is all I'm saying. Julie copied that with Zoe, by the way.
Thank you.
That was a good mom trick.
I'm like a big, let's take personal ownership of our decisions, right? So I try and start them with that when they're really tiny.
So I know what team leaders are thinking right now, because Julie and I have been hired by brokerages, and the number one problem brokerages have are getting their agents to use their CRM. It's like, that's a plague of any kind of sales organization, not just real estate. So how, you also said something too, I want to drill down on it. As a team leader or a broker, a big part of your business truly is recruiting, because you're always looking to, top level your talent, right? That's a big aspect of what you do. You recruit for your team. So how do you go about, first of all, let's talk about the recruiting for the team, and then let's talk about how you go about getting your agents to use the CRM, and do you prune agents that won't?
Okay, awesome. So the getting them to use it, is pretty, it's forced. Okay. So in my culture, we have an onboarding program that's a 2-week onboarding program. And before we will hire anyone, we enroll them in the fact that, hey, listen, you're coming to us because you want to sell a lot of houses, and some of them have been in the business for 15 years, some of them have been in the business for 25 years, and some of them literally got their license like the day before, okay? But ultimately, you're asking me to help compress time and have you be more successful, right? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to be in situations that are uncomfortable for you in training. I'm going to get you on the phone and have you do something we call opportunity hour, where you are picking up the phone and calling leads within the CRM, and you're learning how to be successful in converting that business. I'm also going to have you study at home and come prepared to role play out loud in front of your peers. Will that be a problem for you? No. Great. Fabulous. Okay. So we've enrolled them. We have their commitment before they start. It's not an option. So on day 3, we've gone through the tech, we've gone through the scripts. On day 3, they start making calls. Here's the key. Every single class, I have them in one room. That is on purpose. They hate it. They're like, oh, I don't feel comfortable. I understand. I'm going to have you sit right here though, because if you need to move away from your friends when somebody answers, you can move 2 feet away. Just stay close so I can hear you. Right? So then here's what they do. They get nervous. So they just sit there. Their phone isn't ringing. They're not. So I say, wait a minute. Here's the deal. This is what some of you are going to do. You're going to sit there because you're nervous. So what I'm going to do, if I see you doing that, is just come touch your shoulder. That's me supporting you and letting you know to break through your fear and get your ass calling. Okay. So I'm literally forcing it because some of them are just so afraid. And then guess what happens when they book their first appointment? Their little balloon of excitement fills up. And what I try and tie together with facing this fear is, this is absolute empowerment in the business. There are so many people who are a victim in this business. And that is why 90+% don't make it, because they don't know how to fill up their own pipeline. We have unlimited opportunity for you. You will never get through calling all of the leads that are available and want to do business that we have. But if I don't help you get confident in doing that in your first 2 weeks, it'll likely never happen in your career. Right? So that's like the upfront piece.
So it's like boot camp, basically.
Yes. And they will ask questions. And finally, I will say, we are done answering questions. Now it's time to call.
And if they don't, they're not going to stay part of the Keri Shull team. Basically, if they're not,
correct,
they're not going to operate at that minimum standard of accountability and doing the real work of real estate, they're just not a good fit for you.
They're not a good fit. And there are people that will be like, I have a guy right now that is absolutely incredible. He's not on the phone every day, but he's doing other things that are high level. He came from a background in multifamily investing, right? So it's not, I don't have a one size fits all program. I think any team leader who tells you they do is bullshitting you. But I think you have to have some clear standards and really try and empower your agents to get the confidence to live by those standards. They will fall down. There will be days. I'm not somebody who says, you know what, you didn't make your calls, Tim, you're out. But I am somebody who says, Tim, I appreciate your effort over the last week, but it's not enough to be successful here. So we're not going to invest our time testing you out this time. You would have to go through training again because you're showing up unprepared. Do you think it's a better idea to move to EXP and do this at your own pace? Or would you like to go through training again?
So here, I'm reading the minds of the other team leaders and brokers, and I know you went through this as well when Compass went and poached some of your agents years ago, right? So a lot of agents are listening and team leaders are listening. They're thinking, oh my gosh, this woman puts so much work and time and effort and love into her agents. And then you make them really good. They make them, frankly, so that they can maybe in some ways build their own businesses. And in the old model, pre-EXP, that was a little bit like a dagger to your heart, because there goes all your investment, and this human is walking out the door and you were friends and connected with them. And then they just quit and go off to do their own thing. It's a natural progression of anybody that's like you, who wants to, be successful without really, they want to build their own business. A lot of agents have that mindset when they become really successful. Your prior existence as an independent, that person became a competitor. Now with EXP, that person's still part of your overall community. So when they build their business and they're making, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with you, and they want to go do their own team and be independent, you're encouraging them to do it. And you're still helping them and helping them to grow their businesses. Not Keri, not just locally, but I know you and Dan are doing this nationally. You've had some people that have been local rock stars for you, and they've moved to other parts of the country and they started their own teams, and you're still in support of them. And that's the beauty of what we have here at EXP, right?
It's really cool. I have an agent right now that I'm helping her with her branding, and I'm helping her with all, like, there's so many steps when you're going out on your own. And there's a lot of people around the country right now that are on a team, but they know, you know what? I'm not gonna stay on this team, and I'm ready to grow, right? So for those people, we will help them decide their branding, their colors, their logo, like all of that stuff. What is the tech that they're going to need? Do they need a website? How are they going to track their phone calls? Like all of that infrastructure stuff that can be so overwhelming. How do they set up their CRM? What do they say to the people in the CRM? All of those things, we kind of go behind our leaders and help elevate them so that they feel confident doing it on their own.
Yep. Well, we have to round the bend, but Keri, honestly, you and I could talk for the next, 77 years. I'll definitely have you back on the podcast, have you back every quarter, even more frequent than that, because there's so much you have to share and so many people can benefit. I think we've really shown light on the fact that really what I really wanted to bring to this conversation was obviously what an amazing person you are, and Dan is, and your wonderful family and all the things you've done for the industry. But what I really want to do is I'm hoping people that are listening and watching are understanding, especially if they're teams and they're brokers, that, yeah, this past 3 years has been brutal for a lot of teams and brokers, but there is a way forward. And the way forward actually is more expansive and has more potential than the path that you're probably on now. You just have to open your mind to it. And there's no better example of that than Keri Shull. Honestly, I can't think of another agent, and one of the largest independent brokerages in the nation, moved over to EXP. And her, as a result of that, her real estate businesses, tripled in size. Her, all these other revenue sources that she's creating have just really, grown exponentially. And so I encourage all of you, if you're, frankly, even if you're a new agent, if you're local to Keri, or if you're international, national, doesn't matter, do give Keri Shull a call. Keri, do you mind if we give them your cell phone number? It's up to you. You will get calls though.
Yes, you can text me though, because if you catch me when I have all 4 kids, I'm going to be like, what's happening? My cell phone is 571-334-6051.
All right. So we're going to put it on the screen. Say it again slowly in case they're listening.
571-334-6051.
All right, so text Keri, don't call her, same as I tell you guys on our podcast, because all of her calls are going to go to voicemail.
Yes.
So make sure you text, if mine too. Text, don't call, and then let her know that you're interested in talking with her about EXP. And you're doing a lot of special things. It's one of the reasons that your EXP group is growing so fast. You and Dan have created a legacy group, which is fantastic, because you are attracting those high caliber teams and brokers to you. They're looking for the next natural steps in their careers. And, it's a blessing for Julie and I to be partners with you guys at EXP, and I certainly appreciate it. We're having so much fun as we help so many people. Doesn't it, honestly, Keri, doesn't it feel like your life's work, what you're doing? Oh, you told me that the other day on a call, right? I mean, doesn't it?
It's really fun. It's like, it's helping people recognize their vision and then put a plan in place to get there in a shorter amount of time than they may think. So it's pretty cool.
And bigger than they thought. Like you may have thought 10 years ago, well, big team selling hundreds of millions of dollars, $1 billion a year, all fantastic. But now it's international. Now it's like all these other different opportunities. Yeah. So whatever your resistance was, I didn't ask Keri what her resistance initially was to EXP, because obviously she probably doesn't even remember now.
I remember, but we'll cover that on the next one, because I know we're out of time here.
All right, that's what we'll do. So Keri, thank you very much. Thank you for being our guest today. Listeners, I strongly encourage you to connect with Keri and Dan, absolutely phenomenal leaders in the real estate industry. In the meantime, thank you for listening. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk with you on the show tomorrow. Thanks, Keri. See ya.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.